Hey everyone, my name is Daniel Begimer. I'm a senior security architect in the Global Services Security Organizations in AWS. And yeah, today I'm going to talk about some application security trends, challenges, and best practices. So I would like to start with sharing some interesting metrics based on some researches that has been conducted and published recently. The first one is that we see like huge AML adoption within organizations. We see like 135% of increase. So we know that many organizations are using Gen AI for their productivity to ship better products for their customers. Another interesting metric is that in another survey, 97 of the DevOps and SecOps leads mentioned the using Gen AI for the day-to-day job. So for development, for SecOps operations. They're basically using Gen AI in order to work more efficiently and be more productive. And the last metric, the last data point that I want to share here is that 75% of the DevOps leads that participated in another survey expressed some concern about the Gen AI impact of security vulnerabilities. So how are we going to manage threat detection? How are we going to manage open source? How licensing is going to work. We have some couple of open questions there that hopefully we'll be able to define in the near future, but it's still not finalized yet. Diving deeper into digital native businesses trends, so DNB specifically, we know that DNBs like to adopt new technologies. Gen AI is out there. Okay, let's use it. Let's see how we can improve productivity within our org. Let's see how we can ship and deliver faster for our customers. And that result in basically using Gen AI for development, increasing the velocity. But this may come with some challenges to security teams because they need to keep up with the speed. They need to make sure that the products that we're shipping are secured and we're not compromising on our security for our customers. Taking another step, diving deep into the specific security challenges that we see out there. So the first one is alert fatigue, right? We're getting a lot of different security alerts from different security systems and how we should tackle them, what we should tackle first, how we should prioritize them. So we might have like a critical security issue or a medium security issue, but we need to include the business impact eventually, and we need to understand what is the environment that is relevant for this security issue, right? That comes the context gap. So for example, if we have now a new security issue in an internal environment which is not public, it might be less critical than another security issue that is maybe medium but is public facing. Or maybe we have different controls in our environment that mitigates the risks. So basically, we need to understand the context of the environment. And last and not least, the scaling security. We have developers shipping faster, being more efficient. We want to make sure that the AppSec team, the security engineer, can keep up the pace. Now, we don't want the security process to be a bottleneck. We want the security and the AppSec engineers to be a business enabler and help our business, right? So I can give an example here. For example, on AWS, we have our security guardians program. So we're taking different members of the developers teams, and we teaching them and training them on how to do security, how to do AppSec, and by that they helping their teammates to secure their code and to ship secure code. So they're doing peer reviews, they're doing threat modeling, they're doing any security reviews to their peers, and by that they're helping their customers they're helping the developers to ship a secure code, and they identify any security risk early as possible in the development process. Next, I want to talk a little bit about how our secure SDLC look like, how a secure software development lifecycle look like. So we start with developer enablement. So we start with distributing the security ownership. So I gave the security guardians example, but we basically want to make sure our developers knows how to code, knows how to code a clean and fast type of code that will help customers. But we also want to make sure that they're developing a secure code. We want to make sure they know which security risks are there. We want to make sure they are aware to know how to follow security best practices and using the relevant tools as early as possible. The second bullet point is around securing their local environment. So of course, we want to make sure that the local IDE and endpoint is secured as well. Then we go like to threat modeling and security review. So we're building a new feature, we're building a new product. We want to make sure that we're reviewing it and identify any potential risks early as possible. And we need to look on the architecture, we need to look about the design and think what we can break here or which security risk we have here and which controls are missing in order to mitigate that. Next is the unit and functional testing. So basically, we want to include processes of secure code review, making sure that we have static and dynamic analysis as a part of the developer workflow, any type of security unit testing that is implemented as well. And then we want to integrate it in our CI/CD pipeline, right? We want to make sure we have the relevant tools that when the code is getting pushed into the repository, they're scanning the code for us, they are alerting on high severity issues, they're breaking the build if necessary, and of course also to scan our containers, images, etc. After we develop and deployed our new application, our new feature, we want to see how we can improve from there, right? So we can define a bug bounty program and to get feedback about new security flaws that we need to remediate, how we remediate new security flaws, how we react to the next 0-day, to the next log4j, right? How we can patch or fix our systems in scale with limited impact on our customers. So we can always like improve ourselves and learn from the issues and eventually push it early as possible to the development process. And I want just to finish with like the most important takeaway from my part at least is shift left your security, right? Like we talked about how you can include the guardians and educate your teams about running security reviews to their peers. Talked about like using tools as early as possible. We talked about security awareness. We talked about pushing what we learned um, early as possible to the development lifecycle. So we always want to include our security processes early as possible, closer as possible to the IDE where the developer is writing the code, because it's eventually gonna save us costs. It's gonna help us to develop faster, and it's gonna be also more secure because we're going to detect them early as possible and not too late after the application is already deployed or in the building process. So yeah, that's what it. I want to hand over to David that will talk about the Semgrep aspect.
Yeah, thank you so much, Daniel. My goal here is to kind of continue the conversation around our application security trends and what we've seen, and really, what does that mean in terms of what we need to do? Like, what are the imperatives to us as security teams, and what are some of the options that we have around how we can do something about it? And so the very first major takeaway for me when I listened to what Daniel has said here about kind of the digital native enterprise is that they are synonymous with high velocity development, and the ability to innovate, the ability to drive change in the application and value for customers and pace of that is just key to what these organizations are doing. That has a couple of implications for what does it mean around how applications are built and how teams function. And so very first is obviously the decentralized decision-making model. This is something where development is always going to optimize for speed and ultimately for customer value. And that means that we're going to be optimizing for that over what we can do in terms of security of the application. That also has an implication for the teams and how they're going to work together. And so, because teams are so quickly adopting new technology, new stacks, new pieces of functionality into applications, it means that there's an inherent skill gap on both sides of this equation where security is not going to be aware necessarily of like the latest things or necessarily have the expertise in the technologies that are getting deployed. Candidly, in engineering isn't going to understand the best practices and what they should be doing necessarily with those technologies. And so the key takeaway here of what security has to do is security absolutely has to engage with these teams and help drive collaboration and also drive education to them around what they can do with it. Next, it means that the problems that we have are going to compound faster. And so because the applications are constantly changing, new features getting released, it makes it much more difficult to maintain a holistic view of the organization and assess the impact to the applications and to the program. It also means that issues that we have and debt that we take on are really easy to underestimate. And so, you know, I talk to companies and organizations all the time where they are is they have tons and tons of alerts out of the tooling that they have, and it's really difficult to try to get out from under that burden and even figure out where to begin. And so the imperative here for security is to help deploy tooling that is going to help automate as much of this as possible and also prioritize where we can drive our effort and make the most impact. And then the big thing around that, now that we've said that we have to automate, the biggest problem with that is automated tools can also miss a lot of context. And so Daniel talked about this with the context gap. And so one, it's really important to choose tools that are going to be getting constant updates so that they can stay on top of the threat landscape. And then two, it's imperative to to select tools that allow you to operationalize the intelligence that you have around your organization and your apps. The imperative here for security is that we absolutely have to be retrospective about what we're learning and incorporate that by tuning our tools. So I'm going to unpack each one of those a little bit. So first, I'm going to talk now about the need to collaborate and educate and what does that mean. So first off, on collaborating, the things that we see teams that are really effective here is ultimately recognizing the fact that your engineering org and developers are your customer. And so any success is going to be focused squarely on developer happiness. And also on incorporating the feedback from them. What are they doing? Meeting them where they are, understanding how they're acting and what they're seeing from tooling, and working closely with them to build those loops. Next, it's also engaging them to help you understand where they're headed. Seek input on their priorities. What parts of the applications or functions are they squarely focused on? What are the technologies that they're trying to leverage and what are they thinking about? And what are problem areas for them in terms of, you know, sticking points, new stuff where we don't have patterns or former knowledge from before. That also creates the opportunity to try to bring value to them in terms of new information and educate them on both what have you been seeing across the organization, where has the org historically had problems, what are the best practices that that maybe other teams are using or that security is developing that they can take advantage of. I think this even comes down to the next part of developing paved paths to help establish secure defaults. Essentially, every time someone has to make a decision, I think it's an opportunity to make a bad one. And so, you know, the faster that we can give them to streamline that process, it helps them move faster, and B, it helps you make sure that things stay secure by default. And then lastly, on this front is share the tooling and capability hat. Every security team I talk to is building some you know, telemetry or tooling or ability to detect and engage with teams, and making sure that those end teams understand what those capabilities are and give them building blocks that they can build onto is something that we think can be a really collaborative and really powerful activity. Some of the tools that we try to give you in the Semgrep suite to be able to act on some of these things is, number one, trying to give you a tool that has a broad set of detections. Semgrep offers, SAST, SCA, and secrets detection all in essentially in one job and one platform. And so it's a great way to get a tool that can give you some breadth to be able to help drive these. Two, we think it's really important to be able to track activity and developer feedback so we can see what gets ignored and what gets suppressed, what things actually get addressed and fixed. And then being able to follow through on that loop to both help tune in and dial out things for teams is super important. We also think that Semgrep is inherently flexible in being able to help drive patterns and new detections in the tool. And so it creates a really great place for you to help enforce in your standards and be able to help inform developers about that through the process. And I want to put one quick plug in for those of you that are familiar with the community We Hack Purple. Tanya Janka, that has led it, has now joined Semgrep as our head of community and education. And she's going to be launching a lot of new stuff, both to help build out your AppSec programs, as well as ways to deploy that with our tooling and act on it. And so watch for some more stuff on that front. The second big imperative that we touched on was around automation and prioritizing what's happening. So the very first, the lowest hanging fruit here is making sure that your security tooling is actually scanning and informing people for everything that's going into the application, making sure that you're deployed in CI, CD in a way that people can actually live with it. And to be able to give real-time alerting and guidance to engineers based on those. So meeting them where they are, whether that's in the IDE or like in their PRs. Second, really prioritizing what you want to be putting your focus on. I think one of the things that is an easy trap for teams to fall into is to be purely reactive to the things that are coming out of tools. And I think it's really important to try to establish some budget out of your activity to get proactive. And especially for teams that have built out their threat models, to really think about those in terms of what are the core services and technologies that we should be focusing on, so that we can drive activity around them and really deliver business impact and actionable results from our process. Some of the ways we try to make that actionable in Semgrep is, one, we think being fast in scanning is incredibly important to give feedback quickly and to be one of the first things checks in your pipeline to complete so you can act on it. We think is super important, as well as giving you an engine that's really flexible in terms of where you want to run it, locally or in the cloud. And also giving you a broad set of languages here, so that when that new stack comes into your application and so forth, you actually have some coverage for it. And then we try to give a really unique set of detections to focus your engagement for developers. So for instance, you can engage with them only around reachable dependency vulnerabilities, or secrets that have actually been validated against third-party services, or findings that have been generated by rules and detections that are known to be high confidence and high accuracy, curated by our research team. And then lastly, the other big trend here is we've been really aggressive in trying to get generative AI into a lot of our workflows. And we have a feature today called Semgrep Assistant that can help really focus remediation effort by providing fix suggestions and also recommendations around what types of vulnerabilities from your backlog actually should you prioritize going after for remediation. Lastly, the big imperative that we laid out here was the point to be retrospective and to tune your tooling with what you know. So I mean, every Scrum or sprint cycle has some sort of retrospective into it, and so I expect a lot of teams really understand the value here. But the point is really to be able to diagnose places where we have a context gap. Maybe we're not getting an alert to the right team or the right person, or some other context is missing, and that's really important to prevent these workflows, or is preventing these workflows from actually remediating issues. being able to take a deep dive into results, confirmed results that you've gotten either through your bug bounty programs or through your pen tests, and taking a broader look at them and understanding, well, what actually was the pattern in the code base here that led to this vulnerability, and how can we make sure that never happens again? And that's where it comes into tuning the tool. So being able to deploy new detections for things like that bug bounty to help make sure to prevent reoccurrence, or even sometimes just to gather information. I've talked to a number of security teams that will run detections to say, well, I want to know anytime a new endpoint is getting added to a service. I want to make sure that security knows how to engage and go drive a review around that. And so those can be things that you can tune in to tools also. Of course, you want to be able to update detections and suppress alerts where developers aren't fixing them. So what is the context we're missing, and having, you know, a precise tool that allows you to kind of ignore the things that you're getting feedback about that aren't helpful. And then lastly, again, to make sure that you can enforce best practices and paved paths. With this, so I touched on this earlier, but Semgrep, you know, we try to make the tool extremely flexible in terms of both the patterns that you want to detect, as well as what the remediation guidance and so forth comes up. What I've got in the screenshot on the right-hand side is, it's just a quick snippet of a pull request, where what I've done at the top is I've essentially modified my Semgrep rule to include a blurb around internally, how would I guide developers to deal with this problem? So in this case, we use the JSoup library to sanitize user input. And one of the things you can see that's so cool about the generative AI response here that I'm getting at the bottom is it's actually incorporated that detail into the remediation guidance. And so just by being able to point a developer with a quick blurb of what we do internally, now I'm also able to give them examples of how they could actually fix findings when we've addressed it from code, to be able to act on that internally. And that said, I'm going to now hand it over to Mike from Ripple to kind of tell us a little bit around how they do this, and how they came to look at Semgrep to help.
Excellent. Thank you, David. So my name is Mike. I work for Ripple, and I'm on the product security team. So Ripple's product security team, we collaborate with Ripple's engineers to enable them to quickly create secure software so that our customers' data and money are protected. A lot of what we do is very similar to what Daniel described previously when he was talking about the SDLC. So definitely doing security reviews of design docs, threat modeling, running the bug bounty and pen testing program. But what I'm really going to focus on today is our use of Semgrep. So you know, we do provide a number of tools for automated security scanning. You know, so we have, you know, container scanning and other tools, but we're using Semgrep for SAST, SCA, secret scanning, and license scanning. So that's what we're going to focus on today. So Ripple has been a Semgrep customer for almost a year now. So a year ago, in the beginning of 2023, we were using a different SAST and SCA system that we weren't entirely happy with. So we embarked on a project to replace it. And we looked at a number of vendors, including Semgrep. And we were looking at Semgrep open source and Semgrep Pro. And our goals for this project were to replace the legacy system with a new system that was faster and that provided higher quality findings, meaning more true positives and fewer false positives. We needed to cover the languages that we use, which are you know, Java, JavaScript, Python, Go, C++. And we definitely wanted to be shifting left. So we wanted something that runs quickly in a CI pipeline and that presents findings in a CI pipeline that are easily understandable to the engineers. So what we did was we did a proof of concept. So with each of the vendors, we got the system installed. We ran some scans on a few of our actual product repos. But to really test out the SAST, what we wanted to do was have something that would enable us to do an apples to apples comparison among all the vendors. So I created a fake application that had a bunch of deliberate known security vulnerabilities, stuff like SQL injection, hard-coded credentials, and then we pointed each vendor's SAST scanner at this fake repo, and then we scored them all. So they got points for each of the true findings that we wanted the scanner to find, and then we would take off points for false positives. Of course, so spoiler alert, Semgrep did really well, since we did end up eventually choosing to go with Semgrep. So we ended up going with Semgrep Pro, which did perform quite a bit better than the open source version. And our decision to go with Semgrep, a big factor was this SAST test. We also really liked Semgrep's SCA. The reachability feature is very nice. It helps reduce the number of CVs that we have to look at. Also, Semgrep enables us to search repos based on tags. So we have tags based on things like language, is the repo in production, and that really enables us to prioritize which CVEs that we're actually going to fix. Because anyone who's looked at any SCA tool knows that you can end up just with a very large number of findings, and prioritizing those findings is an important thing they have to do. So eventually we signed on with Semgrep. We implemented it everywhere. And there were a couple of surprises, which I'll talk about now. So, I mentioned that in our proof of concept, we implemented Semgrep scans on a few of our production repos, but once we implemented it everywhere, what we found that actually most of the findings were in IAC code rather than in application code. So certainly there were some findings in application code, but the bulk of them were in IAC code, which for us means Docker files and Terraform files, and to a lesser extent, Helm charts. So this is an interesting finding, and after thinking about what would be the reason for most of the findings being in IAC code, I realized that with application code, developers are often using modern frameworks to write the code, or to implement the code inside of. And these modern frameworks handle a lot of security issues out of the box. So, for example, if you're accessing a SQL database, you're probably using the ORM layer that's provided by your framework. And if you're using the ORM layer, basically in the way that the docs will tell you to use it, that kind of happy path will cause the ORM layer to automatically use parameterized queries, which means that you're not going to be vulnerable to SQL injection. And then another reason for why we saw more IAC findings than application code findings is that I think developers are just better educated about how to write secure application code. A lot of developers have been exposed to things like the OWASP top 10. They've been thinking about things like SQL injection, cross-site scripting, that kind of thing for years. But IAC, I think, is maybe a newer skill for a lot of developers. And I think there's been a lot less training on how to write IAC code securely. Because of that, it's very important to have a tool like Semgrep, scanning all of your IAC code and catching all those things that your developers might not be conscious of. There was one other kind of interesting finding when we deployed Semgrep, and so this second surprising finding really points to the importance of having a really robust SAST rule set. And the Semgrep rule set, at least in Semgrep Pro, it's pretty big. It covers a lot of ground. So the one finding that I saw in our own code that surprised us related to XML, which is kind of interesting, just because XML kind of feels like a dying language. It's on its way out. Usually if you're doing any sort of data interchange, you're probably using JSON or YAML. And if you had asked me a year ago, before we implemented Semgrep, what are the chances that you're going to see an XML finding, I would have said, probably not very much. And I would have been wrong, because after we ran Semgrep on all of our repos, we discovered that one of them was a Java repo, and there was a chunk of code that was instantiating the Java XML parser, which unfortunately is not secure out of the box. With the Java XML parser, you actually have to explicitly turn on the security features. And Semgrep had a SAST rule that was looking for exactly that, and alerted us to that, and we were able to fix it. So yeah, so in summary, what we found here at Ripple after implementing Semgrep is that while OWASP top 10 type of application findings are important, IAC is also super critical, and it's just super important to have all of your application code and your IAC code being scanned by a system like Semgrep. And it's also just super important to have a robust SAST rule set that just covers everything, even the things that might not be top of mind. And so that's it for me. I'll hand it back to Chris.
Awesome. All right. Let's go to let's recap what did we learn today. So here's some very quick bullets about what we covered. Digital native, I think AI is definitely a topic, and we're seeing a lot of questions actually pop up now about AI and ML. So speakers, get ready, because it's coming. And so what that ultimately means, right, is just faster development. Orgs and teams just kind of have to shift left even more. And always, I think tools like Semgrep and even AWS, and Mike has some great examples there too. Our goal here ultimately is to help folks to scan for known unknown vulnerabilities and catch the stuff that you may not even be thinking about. So super excited.